So first, we're going to make a small patch of grass, and we're going to simulate the grass with some wind forces on it. And next, we're going to spread it over an entire surface. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I've made 3 different variations of grass. Next, I'm going to go to the second layer, and I'm going to add a mesh circle with a radius of 0.5 Blender units. I'm going to change the fill type to Ngon, and now let me first rename it. We'll call it geo_grass emission. So this little circle here is going to spawn our grass particle system. We'll go to the particle settings, and I'll create a new slot here. We're gonna make one slot for each of the little grass meshes here. So with the first one, we'll create a basic template that we're going to reuse everywhere. I'm going to call the first slot grass 1, and the settings is actually the name is actually a different one from this one, because this is the slot and this is the settings. So the settings we're going to call grass basic, and I'm going to change the emitter type to hair. I'm going to change the hair length and make it 0.25, and as a number we can use around 20 or so for the beginning. I'm going to change the emission type here and hidden under the advanced check mark from jitter to random. And next what I can do is I can enable hair dynamics. So if I hit Alt-A and start the playback, and I move this little emission mesh around, you can see that the hair is wiggling around on it. Next, what I will do is create an overall wind force to give it some direction. So for that, I add a force field with the type wind. I'm going to move it up a little bit, and I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis. So it's pointing 90 degrees on the y-axis. And if I play back, you can see that the hair is sort of drooping this way. This is because the wind field actually has some strength here. But what we can do now is I can keyframe it, and I'm going to give it some variation. By the way, make sure that all the force fields you want to affect your particles, they should be on the same layer as your particle emission mesh. So I'm going to split my window into 2 pieces, and I'm going to bring up a graph editor here. I made a keyframe here. I'm going to select the curve, and I'll hit N, and I'm going to add an F-curve modifier to it. We'll make it noise, and if I play back again, let me skip to the first frame again, hit Alt-A, you can see that it's wiggling a little bit around. So we can play with the settings here, make it slightly less erratic, add some more strength to it, play a bit with the depth. All right. Now this should be okay for a small breeze. But overall you can see that yeah, everything moves kind of uniform, so we have to add some more variation to that, and we'll do that using a turbulence field. So Shift A, add turbulence field, and this is just going to add some local variation here. So I can show you what it does. I'll play back Alt-A and tweak the size a little bit to make it smaller. If I move it up, you can see that the hair is sort of moving into different directions. And this is what we want, really. We just want some slight bit of variation. What I can do to make this animated is I'll insert a keyframe on the location, on the first frame, and on the 20th frame. I'll move it up a little bit, insert another keyframe. I'm going to select all the curves here, and I'm going to make the curve extrapolated in a linear fashion. So right now The first force field is just moving up all the way. And in doing so, it creates some slight swaying motion here. One thing that you have to keep in mind here is pre-roll at this stage. You can see in the beginning the hair is kind of standing upwards, and then over the course of 20 or so frames it starts to droop down. So those first 20 to 30 frames you can probably not use in your animation because it would look kind of strange. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind. The other thing is that if we're making a file that we're going to reuse over the course of our animation or in a couple of shots, we actually have to accommodate for all the frame ranges in the shots. Some shot might start at frame 1, go to 250. Some other shot might start in frame 160 and go to 300 or so. So obviously you have to accommodate for all that, for all those frame ranges within the simulation. Because what we'll do is we'll bake this animation into this blend file. And then it will be saved in that blend file, and it will also show up in all the other blend files that we're linking this set to. So I'm gonna change the frame range from 1 to 500. I'll go to the cache settings, and I also make sure that the cache is from frame to 500. This will give us a bit of room. In Cosmos Laundromat, we actually had to simulate from frame 100 to 5000 because the blend files were created really early on, and some of them started in frame 1000 up to 1500 and so on. So we had to simulate in a huge range, and in result we had some really huge animation. We had some huge environment files. I think the main environment files for our island was about 1 gigabyte or so. But those were a lot more, those had a lot more variations in the grass and some more particle systems. But for 3 particle systems, it shouldn't increase too radical in size. So we'll let this go. I'll hit Alt-A, and we can kind of see that we have some nice swaying motion here. Next, I'll create the 2 other particle systems. So I'll add 2 more slots. And this one I'll call Grass 2 and Grass 3. And I'll make sure that they link to the same grass settings. Now I have to make sure that they use a different seed to change the distribution pattern. This requires some tweaking, like so, probably. And then it's a little bit crumbled up. That's because by default the hair dynamics isn't checked. So we'll make sure that works. And I'll hit Alt-A. And we can see for each of the particle systems, it draws a red line here for the cache that's currently being written. And we probably have to change the frame range for the 2 other particle systems as well. So go to the cache settings and change this end frame to 500 and here as well. And I can hit Alt-A again to make sure that it's moving nicely. Should be okay. And really, we can re-simulate at any stage later on. This is just to give us a starting point. All right. So now that everything went through, we actually generated the cache from frame 1 to 500. We just have to tell Blender that it shouldn't override it anymore and that it actually should save it in the blend file. So we'll go through all the particle settings here and we'll say current cache to bake. Now you see the color changed here, and if I save this file, I'm going to save it as a different name. Let's call it grass simulation. You can see that grass simulation is now 8.3 megabytes in size. That's because we have written the the physics simulation into that file. And each file that we are linking this system to is also going to get that cache. So that's quite handy because you only need to generate the cache once. So the next thing that we have to do is duplicate the meshes that we have here along these lines here. And there's a handy modifier for that. It's called, it has a bit of a misleading name. It's called the particle instance modifier. It's a bit misleading because really instances in rendering terms are are objects that are pushed into memory once and that are instanced over our scene. But what the particle instance modifier actually does is just creates a duplicate, and that results in a bigger mesh, and that will also create more memory overhead. So really, we kind of opted during Gooseberry to call it the particle array modifier, but the name really doesn't matter. First, I'll make sure that all of the three meshes here are centered. So I'll Alt-G and Alt-R, so the rotation is cleared, and you can see I made them in a way that they're facing upwards on the positive y-axis. And that kind of seems to be important for that modifier. I don't know why, but it just works that way. Next, I have to choose the object, grass emission, and you can see if I play back, actually nothing happens. I have to change some settings of that. So we'll create the particles. We create the instances or the duplicates along the paths, and that seems to be it. We can add some randomness to this. And as you can see, we just duplicated that mesh along these particle strands here. We can change the type of particle system here, or we can change the slot. So we have 3 slots. So I will recreate that for the other ones as well. We'll use the second slot for this. And the third for this. So I'll temporarily hide that second layer, and as you can see, we have a really small, rather basic patch of grass, but each of these strands is, they're looking a bit duplicated right now. In the Gooseberry branch we had more settings to give this also some random rotation, but this should serve as a nice starting point for our field. Next we'll go to the third layer, and for demonstration purposes, I'm going to add a plane. This is going to be my ground mesh. I'll make it 5. This is 10 Blender units large. I'm going to subdivide it a little bit and make it a bit irregular. Now I'm going to create another particle system, and this particle system will actually distribute these objects across the surface. So we have 2 different types of particle system. One that is spawning those little grass stalks here, and then another one that will spread this little patch across the entire surface. So let me make sure that this is smooth shaded just to make it prettier, and I'm going to go to the particle settings. I'm going to add a new slot. We'll call this Meadow. And we'll call the settings Meadow Basic. We'll also change the emitter type to hair. And the next thing that I need to prepare in order to duplicate this object across these strands is I'll have to make a group. And the group actually has to encompass all the objects that we have added in our simulation right now. We don't necessarily need the force fields because we've baked the simulation. So we'll have to add those meshes here, and then the emission mesh, and we'll Control G, create a new group, and we'll name that group grass underscore wind. And there is one more stupid thing I need to do with the rotation, but I'll show you the consequences of it. So I'll go to the third layer, and here I will go to the render tab, and I'm gonna change the rendering type to group. And I'll choose the group that I just created. And here you can see what's happening. First, we also instantiate the particle emission mesh, but we'll get to that. But the other thing is that, well, everything is facing the wrong way. So what we'll probably have to do is rotate it in some sort of magical direction. So I'll select everything. And I think I have to rotate everything on the y-axis 90 degrees. And then I can select my distribution mesh. And here I have to check rotation. And if everything worked properly, you can see that the grass meshes are actually pointing upwards in the right direction. Now, next the emission meshes, that's a bit less tricky. So the only thing we have to do is to check this little button here, use count, and that gives us some control over how often the individual objects in the group are duplicated over this whole surface. So what we have to do is just change the count for the grass emission to 0. And here we go. What we can do now is we can change the size here. Let's make it 0.2. And if I play back my animation, if I've done everything correctly, which I haven't, apparently. Ah, here we go. For some weird reason, I had to enable the first layer. Yeah, I guess the object has to be visible at the same time, but that's okay. We can get around that by doing some render visibility magic later on. But yeah, you'll get the idea. This is how we distribute that little patch over this entire surface, and I can give it some more variation using the random size, and we'll increase the number. Here we go. Now, this is obviously not the end of it. Everything seems to be moving. It's kind of swaying around in the breeze, but really it's looking a bit too duplicated right now. And in Master Branch, there's currently not really any way to fix that. We added some other additional settings for that in the Gooseberry branch. I can show you that. We'll bring up the same file. And one little handy thing that we had, let me hide this. was more options in the particle instance modifier. So we can change the amount of duplicators that are, or the amount of duplications here. We can give it an offset to have different meshes duplicated at different times. And then there's also this handy option here, which adds some randomness in the rotation. And this is really crucial. We usually had some randomness for most of the particle grass meshes here. And you can see that already gives it a lot of variation, and it doesn't look as uniform anymore.